Pastor Mario Segli has posted an article saying that he can disprove evolution. Let's hear what he has to say. He's broken down his arguments into the acronym FALSE. Let's check it out and see how strong his arguments are. F for fossils. A fossil is the preserved remains of a living thing. The fossil record around the Earth extends an average of 1 mile deep. Below this level, we come with a blank slate as far as living complex creatures are concerned. As one source states, the dominant life form was the now extinct sea creature known as the Trilobite, up to a foot long, with a distinctive head and tail, a body made up of several parts, and a complex respiratory system. But although there are many places on Earth where 5,000 feet of sedimentary rock stretch unbroken and uniformly beneath the Cambrian layer, not a single, indisputable, multi-celled fossil has been found there. It is the enigma of paleontological enigmas, according to Stephen Gould. Darwin himself said he could give no satisfactory answer as to why no fossils have been discovered. Today's scientists are none the wiser. Francis Hitching, The Neck of the Giraffe, 1982, pages 26 and 27. Okay, let's start with a few notes on your quote mine there. First off, Hitching had no formal training as a scientist, so his conclusions should be taken with a grain of salt. Secondly, he doesn't deny evolution, only the Darwinian mechanics of it. Finally, he was thoroughly against creationism, which you would have found out if you had read a bit further on in his book. However much sympathy we may have for a belief in the divine first cause shaping the forces that created the universe, and however well-meaning the scientific creationists may be, the straitjacket of Genesis 1-11 is so restricting that to make all evolutionary facts fit within it inevitably ends with a perversion of science. Pages 120. You really should have kept on reading. Also, just to be a bit persnickety, the largest trilobite recorded was over 2 feet in length, found in northern Manitoba. Finally, something interesting happened in Manitoba. Question: if, after almost 2 centuries of digging beneath all the world's continents, no previous ancestor of this first hard-bodied creature has been found, how then did the ubiquitous trilobite evolve? There should be some previous ancestor if evolution were true. The fact that trilobites were one of the first hard-bodied creatures is probably why the precursors are so difficult to find. Hard body parts, like the trilobite shell, are much easier to fossilize. Soft body parts will decay much faster, so have a much smaller chance to fossilize. The first trilobites that evolved a hard shell were a marvel at the time, both allowing for increased survival and increased ability to fossilize, resulting in the multitude of trilobite fossils found to this day. The precursors to trilobites were most likely segmented worms, which, with their soft bodies, do not easily fossilize, so it makes sense that we not find much evidence of them. It's like finding an exquisite watch on the seashore, and yet never finding any previous models of the watch on Earth. If you reasoned as an evolutionist, you would deny there was a need for a watchmaker at all, maintaining that time, water, sand and minerals, and actions of the elements will suffice in producing a fully functional watch that runs. This is part of the reason it takes more faith to believe in evolution than in the creator. I have had people reply using the watchmaker argument on my videos in the past. Yes, if you had found an exquisite watch, you would assume it was man-made. But, and bear with me here, suppose you had knowledge of hundreds of other types of timepieces. Each was known to be the result of naturalistic processes, and there was no evidence of anybody who had ever made a watch, or any kind of mechanical device ever. Then it would be safe to assume this new watch did not in fact need a watchmaker. Darwin was concerned that the thousands of intermediate stages between the creatures needed to prove his theory were not in evidence, but he expected they would eventually be found. Yet, those thousands of missing transitional forms are still missing. Another reference explains, if throughout past ages life was actually drifting over one continual stream from one form to another, it is to be expected that as many samples of the intermediate stages between species should be discovered in fossil condition as the species themselves. All should be in a state of flux, but these missing links are wanting. There are no fossils of creatures whose scales were changing into feathers, or whose feet were changing into wings. No fossils of fish getting legs, or of reptiles getting hair. The real task of the geological evolutionist is not to find the missing link, as if there were only one. The task is to find those thousands upon thousands of missing links that connect the many fossil species with one another. Byron Nelson, After Its Kind, 1970, pages 60 to 62. Wow, using a reference older than I am? Good call. Touché. Anyway, you brought up the argument of fish getting legs. Well, that brings us to Tiktalik. This guy. It was found in 2004 in Nunavut. The bones in its fins resemble the bones of an upper arm, forearm, and wrist, showing to be a transition from fins to limbs. The absence of transitional forms is an insurmountable hurdle for the theistic evolutionists as well. If you want to get technical, every fossil we find is a transitional fossil. Every creature that is reproduced is an intermediary step between its ancestors and its descendants. But fossilization is a rare process. Not every creature that dies leaves a record of its existence. Even so, we have found many transitional fossils. most famous find that is known as a transitional fossil is Archaeopteryx. It highlights the change from dinosaurs to birds, having characteristics of both creatures. While it has the feathers and similar bone structure of a bird, it has the same teeth, tail, and pelvis of a dinosaur. As mentioned before, not every creature gets fossilized, so while we have many, there is no reason to assume we will have every gap filled in. But there is no reason to assume a creator. Speaking of assuming something, A for assumption. When there is no real evidence, evolutionary scientists simply make up assumptions. If evolution were true, then where is the evidence of different types of animals now evolving into other types? Where is the evidence of cats, dogs, and horses gradually turning into something else? We do see changes within species, but we do not see any changes in other species. And, as mentioned, we see no evidence of gradual change in the fossil record either. Yet evolutionists continue to assume that transitional forms must have existed. Well, I already brought up evidence of some of the more famous transitional forms, but evolution generally happens on a much larger timescale than humans can look at. The changes within a species are something that we can regard as a precursor to the development of an entirely new species. If you take a large group of cats, separate them into isolated groups, and let those groups breed, as you said, you'll quickly see change within the species. However, if you keep the groups separated long enough, those slight changes will add up, so the descendants of different groups will not be able to breed viable offspring. That is the best explanation as to why we have so many members of the feline family. They have similar characteristics and a common ancestor, but are different species. Those are all different types of you, aren't they? Yes, they are. In Darwin's landmark book on the origin of species, there are some 800 subjective clauses, with uncertainty repeatedly admitted instead of proof. Words such as could, perhaps, and possibly plague the entire book. I did a quick count. Perhaps only shows up 81 times, and possibly a minuscule 29. I would hardly say they plague the entire book. As for could, it does show up 270 times, but is mostly used in the context of sentences like, they could not know before, but we know now. And even if Darwin had questions about his own theory, in the intervening century and a half, there's been enough evidence brought up by other scientists to affirm his conclusions. We don't believe what was published in The Origin of Species simply because Darwin said it, but because the claims have been backed up by facts and observations. Evolution is still called a theory, a possible explanation or assumption, because it is not testable according to the scientific method, as this would require thousands or millions of years. Evolutionists will counter that a theory is not a mere hypothesis, but a widely affirmed intellectual construct that generally appears to fit all the facts. Yet evolution, in no way, fits all the facts available. Evidence does not support it, and in many respects, runs counter to it. What facts are you claiming that evolution does not fit? If there are such facts, then yes, evolution will have to be modified, or even disavowed as a theory. But so far, while minutiae of evolution has been updated since Darwin's day, the basic idea that animals change through mutation and the beneficial mutations are passed on through natural selection has never been disproved. Evolution is a testable theory because it makes predictions that can be verified. For example, modern whales have either teeth or baleen. Evolutionary theory predicts there would have been a form that both types come from that had both teeth and baleen. That species, Atotius wiltoni, has subsequently been found, fossils that show both teeth and baleen in its mouth. A scientific theory is not a possible explanation or assumption, but a well-substantiated explanation that is based on observed facts that has never been disproved. Evolution fits that to a T. L for life. The law of biogenesis, as taught in biology classes, states that only life can produce life. The law of biogenesis states that complex life cannot come from non-life. For example, it used to be believed that maggots spontaneously appeared in rotting food. Louis Pasteur showed that this is not the case, that complex creatures had to replicate themselves through their offspring so that new forms could grow. Abiogenesis is the hypothesis that self-replicating chemicals became complex enough to result in complex life forms. This is not violating the law of biogenesis, since nothing is spontaneously appearing, but rather the result of a gradual change from self-replicating molecules. You've probably heard the famous question, which came first, the chicken or the egg? It's a real dilemma for an evolutionist to answer. An egg comes from a chicken, yet the chicken comes from an egg. How can there be one without the other? No, it's not really a dilemma at all. Egg-laying creatures would produce offspring that would eventually become birds, then chickens. So eggs from egg-laying creatures would have come much earlier than the chicken. To complicate matters even more, the chicken has to come from a fertilized egg that has the mixture of two different genetic strains from both its parents. So the problem of the origin of life and initial reproduction is still a mystery that evolutionary science cannot adequately answer. You're talking about sex. The first creatures reproduced asexually. The different genders came about because sharing genetic information resulted in more genetic variability, resulting in more offspring with a better chance to survive, speeding up evolution for complex creatures. Yet, for someone who believes in special creation by a creator, there is no dilemma here. First, God made the first male and female chickens, which produced the first fertilized egg, and the rest is history. Sure, postulating God is a simple answer, but is an answer with even less explanation and evidence behind it. If you want a good answer, you need observations that show your answer has merit. S for symbiosis. When one living thing needs another different living thing to survive, it's called a symbiotic relationship. A good example of this is the relationship between bees and flowers. The bees need nectar from some types of flowers to feed, while these flowers need bees to pollinate them. Both depend on each other to exist and survive. The question for evolutionists is, how do these plants exist without the bees, and how do the bees exist without these plants? Evolution does not happen in a vacuum. As one organism changes, others around it adapt to that change. Usually, it's in competition. One animal gets better at hunting, its prey gets better at avoiding getting eaten. But occasionally it's a symbiotic evolution, such as with bees and flowering plants. Originally, plants did not need to pollinate to reproduce, and many still don't. But the ones that developed their ability to pollinate on their own were able to thrive by spreading their genetic material. As they enticed insects and other animals with their nectar, they were able to prosper even more by outsourcing their pollinating abilities. Eventually, both flowering plants and animals that spread their pollen evolved to thrive with each other, but have also become dependent on each other. Again, atheistic scientists are stumped. Theistic evolutionists are perplexed as well. Yet, if you believe in a creator who specifically created the various forms of life on Earth, the answer is simple. Both were created at about the same time. No, not stumped. As organisms evolved, they specialized and became dependent on other organisms in symbiotic relationships. As the creatures thrived under these relationships, they became dependent on them. E for engineering. All living things are exquisitely engineered or designed. Qualitatively, a bacterium is as majestically built for its purpose as a human body is for its function. Yet evolution says it's only an illusion of design, that there is no real designer behind it. Reality is not an illusion. Living things are multifunctional, which means they do many complex things at the same time, something evolution with its step-by-step process has never been able to demonstrate. But sometimes reality can trick us. Humans evolved to see patterns, and we did so well we end up seeing things that are not really there. It was much better for our ancestors' survival to see a shadow that was mistaken for a bear that turned out to be a pile of rocks, than to assume a shadow is a pile of rocks that turns out to be a bear. In the same way, we can see design when it isn't there. The bacterium you bring up has had billions of years of evolution to be as adapted and efficient as it is now. That's why it works as majestically as you say. And yes, organisms can do many things at the same time. That doesn't mean they always did. New features and processes arise and sometimes combine to become integrated into the organism, resulting in new functions. Creatures that evolved have evolved to be the most efficient they can be. This causes them to appear designed, when in reality is the most basic trial and error test imaginable. Creatures that are better able to survive and pass on their genes, and creatures that can't survive, well, don't. One example of a living thing with exquisite engineering is the tree. It provides breathable oxygen for us while processing carbon dioxide, which would in high amounts in the air be toxic to us. It supplies wood, housing for birds, roots to limit erosion, fruit and seeds to eat. It is biodegradable and gives shade. According to the U.S. Department of Agriculture, a healthy tree provides a cooling effect that's equivalent of 10 room-sized air conditioners operating 20 hours a day. How could something so complex arise from a random, undirected evolutionary process? Again, you need more faith to believe in blind evolution than an all-knowing creator who designed the marvelous tree in the first place. But all those things can be easily explained by naturalistic processes. Animals evolved to take advantage of the oxygen in the atmosphere because it was abundant. It was a byproduct of vegetation. The waste after needed carbon was removed from the CO2. A highly oxygenated atmosphere would be deadly to plants, so a symbiotic relationship evolved between animals and plants. Each would take what the other expelled, trading oxygen and carbon dioxide back and forth. A root system helps the tree be more stable. Fruit helps entice animals to carry its seeds, helping spread the plant over a wider area. When a plant dies, it leaves behind a rich amount of unused nutrients. Other organisms, including bacteria, have evolved to take advantage of the source of carbon, explaining the biodegradation. As for the shade and cooling, that's the result of blocking out the sun. Do I really need to explain how that works? And water evaporating off the leaves using up heat energy in the air. All natural processes that can be explained without the need of a creator, all-knowing or otherwise. Now you have 5 proofs that evolution is false, and that special creation is true. And we didn't even use the Bible. Remember the acronym FALSE when you read or hear about evolution. And do take time to read our creator's great book of truth. It has much to say regarding origins. Since not one of your proofs actually disproves evolution, I would say you failed in your goal. As for your FALSE acronym, it makes more sense to use it to explain your claim for a creator that you have no evidence for. Fictional alternative to learning scientific explanations.